In 1898, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy left his post to join the 1st United States Cavalry Unit and fight in the Spanish-American War. That man was Theodore Roosevelt, and his regiment was known as the Rough Riders. The men came mostly from New Mexico, Arizona, Oklahoma, and Texas, and famously gathered at the Menger Hotel in San Antonio, Texas. They were outfitted with M1896 infantry rifles, Colt single-action Army revolvers, and Bowie knives. In July of that same year, Teddy Roosevelt led the Rough Riders to victory against the Spanish Army at San Juan Hill in Cuba. He would later become the 26th President of the United States. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I recreated this infamous Bowie knife that was used by Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. So here's my drawing, close to 9 inches blade length, 8 7/8, the 4.5 inch long coffin style handle. There's going to be brass liner in between the scale and the tang. So I'm using this W2, which is 1/4 inch thick, so that should give me enough steel. It's not quite long enough. When I forge the tang out, draw this out so that I have enough for the handle. So the first step on this knife was I cut out the pattern on a thin piece of aluminum, probably a 1/16 inch thick aluminum plate. A couple of reasons for doing this. I wanted to have a template I could use while forging the knife that I could actually hold up to the steel without it catching on fire. Another reason is just to have it in the future, in case I ever wanted to remake the knife or make something with a similar blade. I would have something that hopefully would last a little longer than just a paper template. Once I had that done, I went straight to forging out that piece of W2 steel, and really I was just trying to draw it out to get the length I needed. I wasn't trying to forge to shape. So I did do a little work on the tip and a little on the edge there to try and get the width. It was a 2 inch wide piece of steel, and I needed just a little bit more width. Once I had that done, I marked out where the shoulders were on the ricasso, and I marked those out on the steel so that I could make little notches right where the shoulders were with a chisel. That way, after I heated it up again, I could find that same mark and then work on drawing out the tang. Try to keep that as even as I could. And once I had the length drawn out to where I needed it, I took it over to the angle grinder to get the forge scale off. That scale is really hard, and it'll dull the saw blade very quickly on the bandsaw. It's much easier to take it off first with the grinder before going over to the bandsaw. There I'm just marking out my pattern and drawing out where the tang is going to be, and then I'm going to take it over to the portable bandsaw and cut out the pattern. And there I'm just cleaning up the cuts and trying to reduce the thickness a little bit on the belt sander. I don't have a surface grinder, so that's about the best I could do, is using the belt sander to get my thickness down to close to 3/16. From there I did the normalization on the knife. I did 3 steps: 1475, 1450, and 1425 F. Once I had the normalization steps done, cleaned up the blade a little bit again, I used my file guide / plunge line jig and lined that up with the shoulders so I could file those down, try and get my shoulders even. So now that I had the shoulders all filed down to where I want them to be, just applied some marking fluid to the blade so I could mark out the lines for my bevels. I had the rough grind on the bevels done, did some hand sanding up to right around 320 grit, I think it was. This was a piece of W2. Originally I purchased this for making jamones. It was the thickest piece of steel I had, and so I had to use it for this project, and I figured I might as well try and put a jamon on there, not waste a good piece of W2. And honestly, I haven't had much luck with the jamones on the W2. The last 2 or 3 knives I've made did not turn out the way I wanted them to. I had much better luck with W1, and this one was no exception. Again, did not turn out the way I wanted. Plus, it had a warp after the quench. So I spent an hour or so, 3 or 4 cycles of heating and cooling, trying to get the blade straightened out. And then once I had that done, went on to more hand sanding, sanded it up to 1500 grit, and went ahead and ground the bevels on the clip there, and then I went ahead and etched it in 3-to-1 ferric chloride solution after that. I did several etch steps of probably around 10 seconds, 10 or 15 seconds each, in 3-to-1 water to ferric chloride, and cleaned off the oxides with some metal polish in between each step. So for the guard, I decided I wanted a little bit thicker than the 1/8 inch brass plate that I had. That was the thickest piece that I had. So I decided I was just going to take 2 pieces and braze them together. So that's what I'm doing there. I cut 2 pieces of 1/8 inch brass plate out, and I'm applying the brazing rod and some flux, and just heated that up with the torch and brazed those 2 pieces together to make the guard. So I got the 2 pieces brazed together, cleaned up the surfaces on that with the sander, and then just found my center line, marked my holes out so that I could start cutting the slot for the tang. I don't have a milling machine, so drill 2 holes, use a hand file, and test the fit. Repeat that process until the guard is maybe an inch or so from the shoulders, and then hammer it on. That's what I'm doing there. So this is the handle on this knife, the coffin shape. It's actually wider at the butt than it is up at the neck by the shoulders. So I had to make a frame handle to go on there. If I would have just cut a slot in my guard to fit over the tang, it would have been too wide. So ended up having to make a frame handle. There, I'm marking that out. It's another piece of W2, 3/16 inch thick, marked out where the tang was going to be. Drilled a hole in the end there so that I could bring it over to the bandsaw and cut out that center slot for the tang to fit into. So I wanted two brass spacers or liners between the steel part of the frame handle and the wooden scales. So that's what I'm cutting out there. Another piece of brass plate. I'm cutting those two liners out. And I'm using some CA glue to attach those liners to the steel part of the frame. That way I can grind them all to shape. I'm going to remove those scales later just by heating it up. That CA glue will release. So there I'm just grinding the assembly so that it's a nice, even, smooth finish between all three pieces. Now I'm marking the pinholes. You use 1/16 inch drill and 1/16 inch pins. So the pins are going to go through all 5 pieces of the handle. They're going to go through each scale, each liner, and the steel part of the frame. There I'm cutting out the scales and clamping it together and drilling my holes so I can get the pins, 4 pins in there. Once I have all the pins in to the entire handle assembly, then I can file that down and shape that so that all the pieces will line up again when I reassemble it. So I don't have really great photos of the original Rough Rider Bowie knife. Some of the pictures I've seen, the guard has it's maybe a little decorative or ornamental kind of a round ball shape on the end. I don't know how accurate that is. I don't honestly know exactly what this knife looked like. I opted just to make a very simple shape. Again, I'm not trying to make a replica of the knife. It's a recreation. It's my version, my recreation of this knife. And so I just opted for a pretty simple style guard. So there I'm removing pins and heating up the frame part of the handle so that CA glue will release. From there I cleaned all the dried burnt CA glue off of the 2 brass liners, glued those back together so that I could do some file work on them, and I used a jigsaw blade as a file guide. That little white blade you saw there was so I could get even spacing on my file marks, and I glued them together so once I reassembled the handle it would be symmetrical and be even. Got them all filed, heated it up again to release the CA glue for that, and then it was time to reassemble the handle. So pins back in, CA glue again, and I'm marking a hole to secure the frame handle to the tang. So the entire handle is secured together with 4 pins, and then that is secured mechanically to the tang with another I used a 3/16 brass rod to attach the handle to the tang, and that's going to be hidden beneath the scales because I'm going to put those on last, so you'll see that. And I'm applying some brass black. Just wanted to give the engraving work on the brass more of an antique look, so the low spots where I filed will remain black or dark, have a darker finish, and that just kind of gives it a more of an antique look to it. So then it was time to assemble and glue up the handle. I used JB Weld right up there on the guard and G-Flex epoxy for the rest of the frame handle. That I find the JB weld is much easier to clean off. You get some on the blade when you do the glue up, and the epoxy is not as easy to clean off as the JB weld. So I like using the JB weld just for the guard part. There's the 3/16 inch brass rod, and it's all held together with epoxy as well as the mechanical fastener, the rod. So after the glue dried, ground out some hollow spots on that brass there just to give the glue more of a bonding surface for when I glue the scales on. Again, G-Flex epoxy for the scales and the 4/16 inch brass pins to hold the entire handle together. So let that dry for 12 hours or so, and then it was back over to the belt sander to finish shaping the handle. Did a little bit more shaping on the guard as well at that point. Guard doesn't turn out perfectly by brazing the two pieces of brass together. You can still see a little bit of a line, but I think it still looks better than a thinner 1/8 inch guard. So I hand sanded the handle up to 1000 grit, and had at that point a finished recreation of the Teddy Roosevelt Rough Rider Bowie knife. Hope you liked the video, and thanks for watching.